everyone, welcome to TeqTalk. I am Jas Kaur, the CTO at Teqfocus. Today, we are talking about how AI is transforming diagnostics. From when data is generated to when a life-changing decision is made. This isn't just a tech topic, it is a patient safety issue. A recent study has found that nearly 800,000 Americans suffer serious harm or death every year due to diagnostics error. And that is a staggering number. I'm joined by two incredible leaders today, Stephan Fairclough, VP of Informatics at Personalis, and Kenny Speer, VP of Software Engineering at Guardant Health, to discuss on the topic. Let's dive in. Thank you so much, Stephan and Kenny, for coming to the show.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Stephan, I have met you once. I know a little bit about yourself. So why don't you start telling a bit about yourself, just a small intro?
Yeah. So my name's Stephan Fairclough. Currently, I'm Vice President of Informatics at Personalis. Prior to being at Personalis, I was at Guardant Health. Both of those are molecular diagnostic companies focusing in personalized cancer diagnosis and working in overlapping and slightly different areas at the same time. I have a passion for that diagnostic space. I think that a lot can be learned by understanding what's going on with our bodies so we can take the right course of action. And I see the power that computation and data analysis can bring to enhance our understanding there. So that's what gets me up in the morning.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephan. Very impressive. So, Kenny, over to you now. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. What exciting things are you doing now?
Yeah, sounds great. So my name's Kenny Speer. I'm the VP of Software Engineering at Guardant Health. My background's actually in systems and infrastructure. So you can think, kernel drivers and storage stacks. But now I pretty much spend my time just supporting the teams that build the software and the platforms around cutting edge cancer diagnostics. So a little bit about Guardant Health. So I joined about 10 years ago, in 2015, and Guardant Health is a precision oncology company. We're focused on conquering cancer with data. We're best known for really pioneering liquid biopsy technology, which is essentially using blood tests to detect and monitor cancer. And our goal is really to get the right information to physicians and patients as early and as clearly as possible. And so whether that be for therapy selection or early detection, and behind all of that is really like this massive effort in data science and engineering and more recently now AI. And I think what gets me up in the morning is that latest topic, right? AI. I mean, it's constantly changing. You really have to spend an hour every morning just to read what happened the day before and overnight just to really stay current with things. It's a extremely exciting time to really be in any tech field right now.
Right. Very interesting. And very rightly said that every morning, a couple of hours, you have to invest time to see where we are today, because every day it's massively changing. Let's start with today's topic, which is AI in diagnostics. You both have immense experience in this area, along with your interest as well. So let's dive in. When most people think about diagnostics, they think about blood tests or scans, right? But the reality is far richer and it's more complex as well, I would say that. So we are in the era where genomics, liquid biopsy, and AI, they all are converging. So there is a huge advancement, but it faced a lot of friction, I would say that. So there are still delays in turnaround. There is still fragmentation in data pipelines. The challenges are still there. So, and also I would like to state one study that shows that even couple of weeks in delay in starting cancer treatment really increases the death by 10 to 15%, depending upon the cancer type. So speed and integration along with accuracy is so important. Right. So, Stephan, let's start from you. How do you define diagnostics in genomics era? And since you have been in this era from a decade or more, so tell me what has changed in the last decade?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start out in some biology, and I know probably most of the audience is software, so I'll try to get there as quickly as possible. But in the field of diagnostics, right, we're measuring the state of your body, and there are a bunch of different types of molecules that can be measured. People who've taken a rapid COVID test, that is a protein that's being measured. You may have heard of the spike protein. It gets run on that little thing, that little device that you have in your hand. You put some of your sample on. So there are lots of different types of diagnostics. Genomics is really focused on specifically the DNA, understanding the genome. And that's done through a process of sequencing. So the sequencer really takes biological information, a biological material, and digitizes it, turns it into a piece of digital information that can be then processed by a computer. And so that's what the genomics revolution was really about, was being able to take biologic DNA material and translate it into digital information that can be processed at scale. And it was really in the forefront of quote unquote big data, right? Now, what does that mean in diagnostics, right? Well, any nucleic acid, DNA, or an RNA can now be measured at scale and used to assess a state within the body. And in the context of liquid biopsy, where Kenny and I both work, a lot of that has to do with circulating tumor DNA. So for those of you guys who don't understand the biology of oncology, tumors, your body sheds DNA normally into the bloodstream. The tumors shed this DNA into the bloodstream as well. It's called cell-free DNA. And it can be used to assess what the mutations are in the tumor that might be giving you cancer, right? And so both Kenny's company and the company that I work at and a number of other companies are in the game of measuring that DNA and trying to help people understand what's going on with their cancer. And depending on the space that you're in, the question that you're asking may be more or less precise. So in the context of therapy selection that Kenny mentioned earlier, you're trying to understand if you have a particular mutation, because many drugs are given based on the mutational pattern that you have. And so you need to know precisely what mutation you have. At other times in the diagnostic space, the question may be different. It's not what type of cancer that you have or what molecular profile does your cancer have. Is, do you have cancer, yes or no? Or has your cancer come back, yes or no? Because it's less precise, you can use other techniques to answer that question, right? And kind of increase your sensitivity by looking at what people call multi-omics, looking at different signals that are coming in, combining them, and then making a decision about whether that person has cancer or not. So that's really where the state of the field is people bringing those molecular techniques through the power of sequencing, digitizing it, and then understanding what's going on in the patient's body at a very precise and sensitive level.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And there are so many questions coming to my mind, but I'll start by posting one. What have you seen changes in last decade? There have been a lot of advancements, right? Like Kenny and I were talking about the prediction, whether you can get cancer or not in coming years. So that is still future, but tell me what has been developed from last decade.
What's really happened in the oncology space over the last couple of decades has been the advent of what people call targeted therapies. Most of these are small molecules that are generated by pharmaceutical companies that need a molecular indication. We need to know what mutation you have. And that's what really drove the need for liquid biopsy, right? Is sometimes those tumors get exhausted, or after a period of time of being on one treatment, the tumor has mutated, has changed. And so the information that you have from taking the tumor out of the body, that's not the same tumor that's still in the body causing problems for that patient. So you need to be able to assess what's going on the ground in that patient kind of in real time. And the combination of the sequencing and that turning it into molecular diagnostics has enabled that. And there's a lot of computation that goes from taking that digital information, analyzing it in a given sample, right, to determine what mutations are there, how abundant they might be, and what therapy should be prescribed. And as cost has come down, you could imagine sort of in the last decade, it was very expensive to do that. And it's still expensive, but cost is coming down both on the sequencing front, which is one of the most expensive parts, as well as on the computational analysis side. And then just operational efficiency as all the companies that are in this space get more and more efficient at it. And that's starting to enable sequential testing, right?
Mhm.
So many of the liquid biopsy tests, because you can go back to the patient and take a new sample, and as costs come down, you can do this repeatedly over time. And that enables tests such as MRD tests, those are tests that monitor for the recurrence of that tumor, to become sort of cost effective, if you will. So just to dive into the MRD side for a second, if you're the way most cancers get treated is it gets cut out of the body. And then people may have heard like, oh, the doctor wasn't sure they got clear margins, or what happens is there are micrometastases. The cancer is a later stage than was initially thought. And so the chance that there was an undetected metastasis somewhere in the body is possible. And so people want to know, was my surgery curative? Did all the cancer get out of my body, or was it not all removed? And so with these molecular diagnostics, particularly those that are ultra sensitive, you can measure after the tumor has been removed and say, do I see any evidence of that tumor still present in this person, and monitor over time. And if it does happen to come back in the future, you can catch it months to years earlier than you can on imaging or even being symptomatic, right?
So you're saying that this is happening now?
Currently, yeah. This is the state of the art, kind of where we were, where it used to be that, you had a lump in your breast, or you're coughing up some blood. They took a scan of your chest and they're like, you have breast cancer or you have lung cancer, right? We've now moved through sequencing to be able to say, like, you have lung cancer with EGFR exon 19 deletion. You should take, not to advertise here, but you should take osimertinib or erlotinib. These are targeted therapies for cancers that have those specific mutations. So that's the arc of the oncology space.
And Stephen, what do you think about the advent of methylation, right? Moving from just pure DNA-based assays to methylation. And, I heard an analogy, which I absolutely loved, which was, the DNA is more the hardware, if you put it in like a hardware software kind of analogy, and methylation is more the software, right? So DNA is what features and functions you have available, but then methylation tells you which ones are actually active and how.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. It is definitely a control layer on top of the DNA. What comes out of that methylation control is the RNA, right? So there are some diagnostics that measure DNA, some that measure RNA, and some assays are starting to incorporate that methylation. All of those sort of fold together to be multi-omics that I referenced earlier, right? And the more things that you're measuring, it means you have more compute to do. You have to have statistics to, like, okay, see some signal over here from this modality. I see some signal. How do I aggregate? How do I integrate all of that information to make an accurate prediction? And that's a place where people are really starting to explore. I'm going to use the term here broadly, AI. And I mean that inclusive of machine learning, right? And we can maybe dive in there a little bit about the applications and how AI and machine learning are influencing that integration.
Thank you so much, Stephan. It's a really powerful framing. And with what you have mentioned, looks like a diagnostic has become kind of data interpretation as much as a lab science, right? Kenny, if we zoom into oncology and liquid biopsy workflows, they are data intensive pipelines, right, in healthcare overall, if you see. So from samples to insights, what are the biggest bottlenecks you are seeing?
Yeah, there's quite a few challenges. You can imagine just listening to Stephen's description, right? Yeah. That if you think about it, from blood to the digital signal, before we even get to like the high performance compute and running algorithms, we have to somehow get that digital signal, right? So that process in and of itself is multiple days, hundreds of instruments in some cases. And while that, of course, is a challenge that's been solved, what's a little bit more complex or difficult is, as science progresses, these assays become more and more complex. And we have to design them now. We've learned over the years, going from one product to multiple, that you have to design these products in such a way that you can kind of, not necessarily predict, but you're going to have to make advancements in the future, and you don't want to have to start from scratch. So how can we build these different parts of the assay in such a way that you can extend them, improve performance, maybe swap something out for a new technology and so forth, right? So you can imagine that is incredibly time consuming to run all of your studies and validation studies and things in order to do that. And so we have to keep that in mind. You mentioned TAT, and it's interesting because you might think, oh, turnaround time is so important. We just have to have the fastest test we could possibly get.
Yeah.
And for late stage oncology, that's absolutely true, because you have a patient, they're in an oncologist who's waiting for a result. They're waiting to make a therapy decision, which could be life or death. I mean, there have been many cases where a patient has been sent to hospice and they had a family member or an advocate that found an oncologist that could order a liquid biopsy test. They take the test. Lo and behold, there's an off-the-shelf therapy available for that patient, and they go into a full remission. And so, I mean, there's many stories like this. And so turnaround time is obviously critical. But then you've also got the monitoring aspect. And so you have a patient that they had cancer, they went through chemo, radiation, they've gone through a therapy, and now they're being monitored. When they get that test, I just heard this 2 weeks ago from a patient. When they get that monitoring test, they're on pins and needles waiting until they get the result. So the result isn't necessarily going to drive their treatment, but it's the mental aspect and the emotional aspect for the patient and their families. Did everything I just go through, was it for nothing? Did it all come back, or is it still gone? Am I still cancer free? And so, TAT is important there, but in a different kind of way. And then finally, from a screening perspective, the whole point about screening is you want to make it accessible to as many people as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to really make it less expensive. And so in this particular case, from a screening perspective, you don't need a 7-day turnaround. You don't even need a 14-day turnaround. Although, there is the competitive pressure to have a lower TAT, but nowhere near, the other types of tests. And so I think turnaround time is certainly a challenge, because you have to build these systems in a way that optimizes the cost and benefit of the turnaround times. Aside from that, despite all of our advancements in automation, we've been doing this a long time, we know how to do it. It's an incredibly manual process. And even in a fully automated lab, there is a ton of manual processes involved still, whether that be from the R&D perspective, dealing with different regulatory bodies and compliance documentation and things like that. It's a huge burden today, especially when you have things like, the FDA releasing new cybersecurity guidances, and you have to turn on a dime and all of a sudden address them. And so, this is a big challenge. And then finally, I think Stephen mentioned, multimodality or multi-omics, and, having different types of data available today. They're in different islands. And oftentimes they're completely incompatible. So for instance, we can't have necessarily scientists looking at R&D data and analysis data and then have them have access to real world evidence, because there's, patient information there that's confidential. And so we have to have a way that we can marry all of these different data types together and actually make them useful for research. And so that's a challenge as well.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And thank you so much, Kenny. I'm curious to know, can you define the patient journey? You mentioned that the wait time could be 7 days or more for the result. So can you help me knowing that if a person is going for a test in the hospital and they go ahead and do, first of all, have they got this liquid biopsy available to everyone, or it is only based on certain cancers? That information as well. And they go to hospital, do the test, and then how long it takes, why it takes long time. If you can put on a little bit of information and that aspect, that, okay, maybe the systems are disconnected a lot, and some other factors, internal factors, which you can help us know, and the result comes, and then the treatment starts. So overall kind of journey. And Stephan and Kenny, if you can both help me and understand the whole patient journey for any cancer.
Stephen, you want to take a stab at it first?
Sure. So I think there's 2 layers to think about this. So let me provide some broader context. So when we think about, one way to think about patient journey is sort of what stage is the patient's cancer, right? So there are people who may be predisposed either for biological or circumstantial reasons, like, they smoke, so they're predisposed to lung cancer, something like that. Those people want to be screened, right? So they can identify if that predisposition is manifested into cancer early on. So that's one stage of things. Then there's a cohort of people that they've received a diagnosis that they do have cancer and they want to take some action for it. And as a moment ago I mentioned, the primary way we treat cancer is we try and cut it out of the body, right? That's the first thing that we go to. So if it's early and it's small and you can get clear margins, you can cut it out of the body.
I have a small question. So blood test is, Kenny, you were mentioning about the blood test, right? Which can help in detection of the cancer. Is it like for all the cancer types or it's only for the specific ones? So why do we need to cut the portion of tumor? Why can't we just do it from the blood test?
I think there's a number of reasons for that, right? Okay. So for instance, I mean, let's take a brain tumor, right? That's going to be very difficult to biopsy without doing a lot of damage, right? And so I think doing a blood test there makes a lot of sense. Or you can have an aging population where you don't want to do a lot of lung biopsies. Recovery and cost of that biopsy is probably going to be extremely high. And so there's a lot of scenarios like that. But unfortunately, liquid biopsy, I mean, today, I think pretty much all it's accessible. There's enough FDA approved products on the market and lab developed tests that it should be accessible to pretty much all oncologists across the country. Screening is a slightly different paradigm, just because it's more consumer facing than oncologists.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Stephen, you want to add to that? I'm sure there's many other scenarios.
I was going to go back to the patient journey. So people know that they have cancer, right? Mm-hmm. The way that it primarily gets treated is you cut it out of the body, so that you get a scan or whatever, and you cut it out. And then there are sort of two questions that people want to ask. Is the first one is the therapy selection that we talked about earlier. If I need to give a drug, what drug should I give? Right? And the other one is the monitoring, the MRD test. Did we get all the cancer? Has my cancer come back? Right. And so both of those are particularly well suited to that liquid biopsy space that we were talking about. Now, to dive in another layer down, right? In any one of those segments, either in the screening segment or in the oncology space, if you're looking for therapy selection or monitoring, a patient is going to have a sub-journey in there, right? And so thinking about the patient journey there, right? The question is, did the doctor get all my cancer? Did it recur? So they're experiencing that, and that's a place where there may be some anxiety or a need for expediency, going back to our turnaround time conversation. And if they need to administer a drug in the therapy selection space, as Kenny mentioned, these are usually very late stage patients and maybe going on hospice or whatever. And so getting them information that can get them onto a therapy would expedite things. And so those are the patient journeys, late stage. And Kenny talked a little bit earlier about how TAT in the screening context may not be as important because people aren't on sort of death's door. They may not even have cancer. We're just trying to assess so there's a little bit less urgency there. And so each of those patients comes into their journey in a different mindset with a different need, right? And so thinking about the later stage where there's more urgency around the turnaround time, and going back to your question around sort of interconnectedness, that's where it really is important, where we're trying to hit that turnaround time, to have a process that is streamlined, systems that are integrated, information flowing, and sort of making determinations and recommendations to the managing or treating physicians, so that they can care for those patients. Does that sort of answer your question there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was thinking for a concrete number that, okay, after 7 days or 10 days, result come out. But I think that's not the case, because it is from person to person.
Like, just from the practice of medicine, right? Like, physicians typically aren't scheduling a follow-up with a patient in less than 7 days. So compressing that time quicker than that has diminishing returns. And so to Kenny's comment earlier, you do have to weigh off the cost, because you want to make tests affordable to customers. And if you spend a bunch of time providing something that's not valuable to them, and it makes the cost, it makes it less accessible. So it's a trade-off. It's an optimization between the cost of running the test and meeting the clinical need.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other aspect that I just wanted to mention briefly, as Stephen was talking about the patient journey, is, the human body is amazing. And one thing that I learned, the past 10 years or so is that, cancer, it changes. And so you can have cancer, be given a therapy, and then it can actually build a resistance to that therapy. And that's one of the things that we're monitoring for, right? And so you might think to yourself, what do you mean it came back? How does it come back? It comes back because it changed, right? And the therapy is no longer working because now there's a resistance to that therapy. And so, that would be another mutation that hopefully there's a scientific paper on, and there's already another therapy based on. And then your physician can change your therapy for a new one that will have higher efficacy.
Yeah, and this is very important. And thank you so much, both of you, for giving this whole journey. It is like how Kenny, you mentioned that human body is amazing. So where we are, what we have to do with it, it varies from case to case. I truly believe, and I'm really hopeful that in coming years, as we see that AI is progressing so much, we will have definitely much more concrete answer to these questions, especially in case of cancer, which is the name itself scares. Right. I was talking to Kenny before, and we were just talking briefly that how scary this even word is. So let's talk a little bit about AI, which is
before we go into the AI. I think one of the things you asked the question earlier is what's changed in the last couple of decades, right?
Yes,
and
last 10 years.
I think a really hopeful thing that's changed in the last couple of decades is that, a lot of people's fear is rooted in the thought that cancer is a terminal disease, right? I have it die, I'm going to die.
Yep.
And it's really shifting into a managed disease, right? And so that there are interventions that can extend your life. And in some cancer cases, we can detect it, and the physician performs surveillance or active monitoring or some terminology, and that people end up dying for other reasons other than their cancer. Before that cancer gets to a state where it actually is terminal. So all of these changes, this genomics revolution, all the insight, the targeted therapies that have been developed, there's really shifting the needle, changing cancer into a managed care disease rather than a terminal disease.
Absolutely. This is very, very important, and one of the major differences, right? Because of the drastic advancements in technology. Thanks, Stephan. And let's move on to AI, which is in action today. And we have seen a lot of studies regarding cancer as well. We know all the progression, how it's going on. So one of the studies that has shown that AI has assisted mammography, that it keeps your accuracy stable, and it reduces the time of radiologist reading by 44%, which is huge. And Kenny, I'll come to you first. Where is AI making the cleanest and clearest difference in your workflows, be it your speed or error reduction or helping clinician interpret the results, or in any other areas?
Great question. I think, I can build on your anecdote very quickly in that, in histopathology, AI has, and these models are extremely accurate, and they can help classify tumors and things like that, where it might take a physician a little bit longer. And so that's certainly an area that I'm sure both Steve and I are leveraging AI. But I think it's bigger than just the targeted use case like that, right? So especially in diagnostics companies, I mentioned a lot of the documentation, regulatory burden. It is, when there's an FDA submission, you're taught for a diagnostic device, it's, between 3,000 and 10,000 documents. It's an incredible amount of work, and humans had to write all of those documents, right? But if you think about the process of, let's say, taking code or taking requirements and then creating a hazard analysis, for instance, LLMs can do that. When you look at, writing code and saying, hey, did I implement all these requirements in my code? LLMs can absolutely do that as well. And then writing the test cases, executing the test cases, and so forth. You still need humans to validate at this point still, but the opportunity is there for AI to fill in all of these gaps. The hard part today is the framework. The framework doesn't exist yet for businesses and companies that have identified hundreds of use cases to actually implement and solve those use cases. And so we're doing that slowly within Guardant. I'm spearheading a couple different initiatives to build out these frameworks. And what I've realized is, you've got all of these different companies from, I don't know if I want to say all their names, but Jira, Confluence and Salesforce and Slack. Everybody's got a little AI icon now. The problem is that AI icon works within that system. And that's not where our problem is. The use case I just specified included 4 or 5 different systems. And so AI in one system isn't necessarily very helpful, but it's connecting those systems together. And that's where we really have to build frameworks. And so that's where we're seeing the biggest gains from AI. The first challenge, though, is how do you get, we have 3,000 people or so at Guardant Health now. Only a small portion of them are actually engineers. How do you get people to use ChatGPT for anything other than writing an email or a joke, right? So what we did is we flooded the company with ChatGPT, and then we started providing training and saying, here's how you use it. And once you hit a particular critical mass where you start seeing people that are now organically using it for things other than just writing emails, now we can start doing a little bit more advanced training. Now I start realizing what some of the bottlenecks are. A few weeks ago, I had a software quality person. He's not an engineer. He's from the quality team. And he was like, Kenny, I vibe coded this app. So he used, Visual Studio with, an agent mode, and he vibe coded an NCR non-conformance report app. So when something goes bad in the lab and it impacts a patient result, you have to write a document called an NCR. Well, there's a whole bunch of things that this document needs to include. He wrote an agent to do it. But then he said, well, what do I do? It's running on my laptop. How do I deploy it? And it was like, I had this aha moment. Wow, we need to build a framework to allow people like this that are non-coders, they're not part of the infrastructure team. How do they actually deploy these agents for people to use? And so that's part of the problem that we're solving now. And, I'm just talking about operational efficiencies. We haven't even gotten to actually leveraging AI in the products themselves, and that's certainly happening. And this is the other thing that people really need to think about when you think AI. There's 2 ways to use AI. You can use AI to help identify and solve a problem, or you can use AI as part of the solution. And I think the latter probably only comes into play about 10% of the time. And so we're starting to implement this AI first mentality at Guardant, where when you are faced with a new problem, rather than just doing things the way you did them the year before, now we want you to think about AI. Can AI help you solve that problem? And maybe the answer is no, and that's okay. And that's what AI first means. You have to at least consider it. And we're still a long way from really reaching the potential of all the efficiencies we can gain from AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
can talk about this for another 3 hours.
I know it's a very big topic and a pretty interesting topic as well. But a quick question on the framework you mentioned, right? And I completely agree that there is no framework which will enable people to start using AI or adapt it. So what do you think? A centralized framework for companies like Guardant will help? Or you think this is organization basis as well? Like, each of the organization need to have their own framework from top and then start pushing it to the people working on ground so that it can be
So interestingly enough, so I started this initiative a few weeks ago, and what happened yesterday at OpenAI's Dev Day, right, is, or might have been 2 days ago, they released the GPT kit, right, or agent kit. And that framework is similar to what I'm thinking of, but I think it's not necessarily for diagnostics, right? What you need, here's what you need to do, or here's what happens. Let's say you have a scientist or a bioinformatician, they have a need, and they're smart, and they're reading about all the cool LLM stuff. So they go, okay, I'm going to go write an agent, and then they say, how do I connect to my data source? Oh, let me write an MCP server, or model context protocol, right, to access this Postgres database. And now they have that, but then you have another scientist that comes along behind them and is like, what do I do? And they don't know about that MCP server. So I think, part of it is this framework needs to reduce duplication by step one is identify all of your data sources and make them easily accessible, right? MCP, perfect example of how to do that. So put an MCP server in front of all your data sources. And now what the next challenge is really just deploying. So, okay, let's make this a self-service portal. Let's give everybody access to create and deploy an agent. Let them connect the different MCP servers. Make sure the agent runs as the user. So, you have security in place and so forth. And then, of course, you just need telemetry and think. Nothing that I'm saying is specific to the diagnostic industry, right? Or even healthcare. This stuff is required for every company out there. And I think there's a lot of startups trying to solve this, but none of them are, I think, building a framework like this.
Yeah, so I think I agree. So the way I see things is there's what I consider a last mile problem, right?
Mhm.
It's like, as Kenny was just describing, like there's fundamental capabilities there, right? Like there's a car, or you can take the train to San Francisco, but then how do you get that last mile from the train station to wherever? That's kind of where the state of the technology is, right? Or you can fly in or whatever. And I think everybody realizes this need. And, you know, I've talked to a number of kind of startup companies and things like that that are trying to close that last mile. I think ultimately what will happen is that the big players in this space, the OpenAIs, the Googles, recognize this, and they'll ultimately use their enterprise scale and enterprise presence to close that gap, right? You can see it happening with Gemini if you're a Google Workspace user, right? Gemini's got that little blue star in every corner of your screen, right? And they're starting to stitch it together. It has access to your Google Drive. They're putting in the authentication stuff so that you can query your databases and stuff like that. And I think that will probably be one of the solutions that wins the day. Will there only be one solution? Certainly not, right? But it will be a dominant solution for sure.
And I mean, for your readers, I would say beware of vendor lock-in, right? It's going to exist. You already see it today. Like Microsoft Copilot gets a lot of bad press. But if you have an enterprise account and you're working within the Microsoft ecosystem, it's actually amazing. It works extremely well. But for anybody who has any data outside that ecosystem, it works horribly. And so I think, watch out for vendor lock-in. It's part of why I want to build my own framework, is because I don't want to be locked into one vendor, and I want to interact with all of the systems that we choose. And I want to, pick the systems based on, best fit for the job, not because it's, shipped by a particular vendor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think vendor lock-in is another big topic, and it varies. There is no fixed kind of statement that, okay, just do this, it's going to work. So people have to see their own infrastructure, have to see the whole system, and then get what works best for you. Stephan, in genomics, I would like to understand which parts are benefiting most from AI. Is it rare mutation detection, structural variant calling, automated reporting, or is there anything else?
Yeah. So I think to provide the lens through which I view AI in this space, and I know you asked me specifically about genomics, so I'll get there. But I think about sort of core analytics, which is what you're referring to. I think about core business process, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then peripheral business process, which I think Kenny kind of mentioned when he was talking about like generating documentation for compliance and things like that. So all important. On the analytics side, broadly speaking, AI has come to mean, when people are talking about generative AI, but the concept of AI has been around for literally decades. Right? Yeah. Turing had the idea that at some point there was going to be a computer that would be indistinguishable from a human, and that became the Turing test. And then in the 50s, people kind of labeled that level of intelligence artificial intelligence if it was driven by a computer, right? And that included not just what we see today, generative AI from like ChatGPT or Gemini, but machine learning, right? And so the arc of this field has been applying statistics to larger and larger data sets requiring computation, right? To the point that it's no longer even possible to do the amount of statistics, the level of computation, by hand. And that's really became sort of the basis for early days that's when it was called sort of machine learning. And you would train in more and more data on this. And so a lot of the analytics and the diagnostics after have been around for a while, and that's pretty well trodden. There are statistical approaches to define a training set, validate that on a test set, and then have deterministic reproducible results out of the performance of that algorithm, right? And so as you were referring to variant detection, right? So specifically in the genomic space, one of the questions is the mutation that I'm seeing there a real mutation that existed in that patient, or is it an artifact, a technical artifact of the processing of that sample in the lab? Is it technical noise? And it matters to make sure that you get that right so that the patient gets the right treatment. And so there's been a bunch of analysis that's gone in to understand sequencing error, the artifact introduced by a process called PCR, so that you can quantify that and remove it and accurately call the variant that the patient is going to be diagnosed with. And Guardant Health sort of was in the vanguard, and that's what enabled them to sort of establish liquid biopsy was the techniques that they brought from sort of statistics and computation in the form of machine learning, brought AI. I think the other place that I see it that's more general to the diagnostic space, and it's core business process, but it's not core analytics, is that you have information coming in. You have to track that information. So you get a lot of handwritten like order forms and stuff like that that many other businesses get as well. And you have to get that information accurate so you get the right diagnostic information attached to the right patient, so it goes back to the right physician and the right patient gets treated, right? And that is, again, reliant on a technology that's been around for a long, long time, right, is OCR. So that optical character recognition is classic sort of machine learning derived capability. It's not generative, it's interpretive, right? But you guys may remember Google, like back in the 90s, like wanting to digitize all the books. Like that was the field ingesting large amounts of information and learning how to read human handwriting, basically, right? Yeah. And then you can couple that with the statistics and the optical character recognition to actually then taking that and filling out forms or moving information from one place to another. Again, it's not generative AI in the common sense right now, but it is algorithmically driven population of information into a new field or a new data set, right? And so those are the two places where I think the technology is actually fairly mature and has advanced the field sort of tremendously. And I think we'll continue to see improvements in those areas.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, with OCR, there are improvements because you've got companies now that are taking the OCR outputs, throwing them at an LLM, because you end up getting like some misinterpretations, right? And so now they are leveraging LLMs to correct and improve some of the OCR outputs.
Yeah, pretty interesting. And to move further on, I would like to know some interesting stories from your own organization currently. Tell me one story from Personalis or and from Guardant Health where you think that AI has surfaced something very meaningful and that has changed the care.
Interesting question. Well, it's a hard question because, at least from my perspective, I don't see AI directly impacting patient care. I see it being used to help us improve our products and potentially save time and reduce TAT, and then that obviously indirectly impacts patients.
Yeah.
So for
indirect as well would work. So.
Well, we open the conversation today talking about histopathology and imaging, right? So we are using AI now that is helping us classify, slides for PD-L1. And, this is one of the only approved methods of detecting and reporting on PD-L1. And so that's an area now where, that classification is done by an AI and it's validated by an oncologist or a pathologist, right? And so that's certainly one area, and that just helps us really, process more patients faster with more accurate results.
Something to emphasize, right? Like that application is really powerful because it improves the sensitivity, improves the outcomes for patients, right? Yeah. Like we all love pathologists and doctors, but there's the AI is actually more sensitive. It can get better outcomes for patients by applying that technology in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Stephan. Stephan, from your side, tell me interesting use case you are building or you have built in Personalis, which is creating impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, right, like when I think about time that I spent in like reducing the noise reduction that you guys were talking about, again, it's not generative AI, but like that whole field of variant calling in the therapy selection space was enabled by machine learning. That signal noise processing, that technology does not exist without that. And I think about that, and like one of the most impactful things for me was, working in the space. Sometimes you have friends and family that take your tests, right? And I remember I had a buddy from college who was he and his wife were teammates of mine, and her mom ended up getting lung cancer, and I recommended that they take the Guardant 360 test that we had worked on and they found a mutation that had a therapy associated with it, and they were able to get her on that therapy. And
what is that 360 Guardant 360? If you can describe
diagnostic
it.
test, it's a liquid biopsy test. Yeah,
Okay.
that's sort of the brand name of it.
Okay.
And she got to spend more time with her grandkids that I know that my kids are friends with, right? And we went out to celebrate a birthday a few years later, and her sister was there, and she looked at her sister and she said, Steve helped build the test that extended mom's life, you know? And like, that's the greatest, you know, feeling in the world that I can say, right? That, you know, stuff that you've done through skills that you've acquired and technologies that you've helped develop, like made a meaningful impact to the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so touching, right? You helped in extending the life of a person. So what could be better than that? I mean, you were touching somebody's life directly or indirectly. That is what I really feel very hopeful when I talk to people like you both, that there is still a lot to be developed. If we talk about cancer, it's not going to go away, but then in coming years, we will see that we have 100% curable mechanism or therapies or medicine for it. So which will not be, and we have seen that it has changed a lot from last decade.
Yeah, I think looking forward, just there are, you know, people have thought about cancer as a broad disease, but even in our conversation, we recognize that there's lung cancer or breast cancer, and at the molecular level, there's even differences there, right? And that's where sort of machine learning, AI is going to allow us to further personalize the understanding the diagnosis in a way that the human brain sort of can't. We lump things together from expediency, right? But we are now seeing the personalization of these diagnostics that is totally enabled by the obviously other technologies, but inclusive of machine learning and, you know, AI, generative AI is coming into this space as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's interesting because I see us. The future is going to be very different. Like right now, we're very reactive, and so all of the anecdotes that we talked about today is somebody had a symptom, they went to a physician, they took a test, something was bad, then we took an action, right? Or you've already had cancer resected, and now you're monitoring it. We're going to look for something, wait for something bad to happen, and then we're going to do something about it. And I think the future, I don't know when, but I think it's going to come, is where we can do more predictive analysis, right? And, you know, there's so many questions we don't know. You have two patients, they have the exact same DNA mutations. One of them has a positive response to a therapy and one of them doesn't. Why not? Right? There's more information, and this is where we get into multimodal, right? There's more information available. Maybe it's in the health records. And so, you know, one of the topics we didn't have a chance to get into today was really taking this multimodal data set and then trying to, you know, improve patient care by connecting all these different data sets together. And I think LLMs and AI in general is what is the tool that's going to help us do this, right? And we'll get to a point, instead of being reactive, we'll become predictive. And then more so than just becoming predictive, we'll be able to make, so today, all of your decisions, all your clinical decisions are made based on guidelines, right? Guideline says you have this, therefore you get this. And I think in the future, those guidelines will have to change to where it's, you know, based on patients like you, we think, you know, here's the best possible outcome. And maybe it's fifth on the guidelines, but based on all the different things, all the markers that we know about that particular patient, we'll be able to make better decisions. And I think that's coming. I think that's going to be the next wave. And then soon after that, hopefully you'll see an eradication. I don't think in our lifetime we'll see cancer eradicated. It's a biological norm, right? But I do think that the impact will be much, much lower than it is today.
Great. I think absolutely agree and hopeful for those things coming in our future. Thanks, Kenny, for touching on what's next. Stephan, from your side, do you want to add what is next going to happen in the field you're working in next 5 or 10 years? If you just close your eyes and think that, just forget about all the rules, risk, regulations, compliance, and tell me what you think after 5 or 10 years you would like to see.
Yeah, I really want to see the completion of the transition from cancer from terminal disease to, you know, managed care disease,
Yes.
Right? We're going to get there in our lifetime, right? And I see people in my life right now who are benefiting from that, and I just want to do a better job for them.
Yeah. All right. I think we all are on the same page. We all have the same mission and vision. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining the conversation. Really candid, informative, and full of fun. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Stephan.
Thank you so much. It was a great time.